Everybody, I'm excited today. Happy Monday. Happy in this interesting COVID outbreak time. But there's nothing a better time than to podcast with good people. I have the man, the myth, the legend today, Herb Thompson. You may know Herb from a couple different things, but mostly I think, I'll let Herb kind of explain himself, but, was in the Army Special Forces. Very happy that we have an Army guy on here, not the Marines and Navy and everybody else I've recently had on here. Not to disrespect, they were great, but at least we'll get some smart folks on here today. But Herb's had a great background, and I've really enjoyed following Herb and looking at his posting. He's had some incredible advice for individuals that are transitioning out of the military into the civilian. We know that's a very important topic, especially nowadays. Let's see what happens over the next, I'd say, a couple of years. It's going to be it's going to be a different landscape, just as things are as it is. But I think it's going to be something that's going to be an interesting change in the way we do how we have our lives. And I think Herb will be great because he'll be able to explain those types of things and help our soldiers out as they go through this type of transition. Ladies and gentlemen, Herb Thompson.
Yeah, I don't know about a legend or anything like that, but happy to be on here, Scott. Herb Thompson, management consultant and current executive MBA student at Cornell. But probably, how I got here is a lot more fascinating than those two things of joining the Army at 17 years old. Knew I wanted to be in the Army since I was a little kid. And I had two goals: be a drill sergeant and earn my Green Beret. Fortunately, I was able to do that. But then, coming towards the end of my career, I didn't know what was next. I didn't really have anything to go back on. I just knew, okay, I had to have my college degree, and then what am I going to do there? And then, I started my transition mission of where I was going, really finding myself and my path. And then once I kind of got on that way and, out and somewhat successful in my terms of successful, then, I did the book, The Transition Mission, and all about helping others find their success and path along the way.
So let's start with a little bit more about you. I'm always curious about this, especially with career military folks who have been successful. You've been at the top of the echelon on both sides. Been drill sergeant, been in the special operating forces. First off, what made you want to join? I know you probably get these are the questions all the time, but I always want to know, because I'm trying to figure something out when I talk to people. There's been a very consistent answer. I'm kind of seeing what this is. It follows the same type of mold.
Yeah, I don't know if it was one direct thing. I mean, obviously, my parents didn't serve, but they took me to like the Memorial Day parades, the veteran ceremonies in our small town. And then, when I was younger, I read a couple National Geographic, saw some shows about Green Berets, and I was like, that's what I want to be. And then from that time, I just knew. So I probably didn't necessarily apply myself as well as I should have in high school and through school, because I knew I was going to join. That is what I wanted to be. But I can't put my finger on it as this was it. But I knew I wanted to serve. And quite frankly, also, I knew that was the only kind of way to change my lot in life. Coming from a not well-off family that struggled, that was my way to also get out of there and do something with my life.
So it's interesting. Just one quick thing. Were your grandparents, was your grandfather or grandmother in service? Did they fight? Were they in World War II?
Yeah, actually, my grandpa was in the Korean War. I knew he served in the military because my dad was born on an Air Force base in California, but I didn't find out until after I was in that he was actually an infantryman in the Korean War. So it was kind of interesting once I found that out, after serving for a couple of years.
So that's interesting to me. So there is still. So I'm not dismissing it, but there was we're looking at a different thing, and I think it also, even with the transition thing, when it comes to people understanding, just because we're, and this better than anybody else. So there's obviously a growing disparity. The military civilian divide gap is getting bigger by the day, right? Even by the second, for that matter. The civilian population is so far removed. But then, then what's happening? But I understand, right? I mean, the population's growing, and forces, end strength is shrinking. But it's always interesting to me because I always look for that type of connection. My dad didn't serve. My mom, same kind of thing. But my mom, very patriotic in a sense that ensured that I, always put the flag up, always talked about things like that. And she was a single mother too. She was very passionate about, service and country. She did not, she was in the Peace Corps, actually, of all things that she did serve. So she was more of all those things. And I got to tell you, we've been through some pretty shit, probably, places in the world, but Peace Corps absolutely goes to certain places, and they live in probably what would be, I would say, worse conditions than some of the things we live in.
Yeah, that's different.
Yeah, because they're really there for mission. So I did hear some stories, but it's interesting to see. But no, it's interesting because it draws that same line, which I think we have to work on. And that's a part of some of the things I think you do, and that I like to do too. Is I want to expose more civilians to that, to the harsh, to really what the life is of veterans, right? And service, because I do see that, but it's always interesting. It seems to be either one generation removed. I know you left it, you didn't find out until after you were in service, but I still think it's instilled in the parents somehow that sense of service is still there. But it's something I think we still have to continue to work on, because it's, and through different events. And I think, if you let me know what you think, but yeah, I think that's going to be, as we grow on, although I do think that military recruiters might have an easier time here in the next 2 years than, the telling all those interesting stories to me. And I'm sure you may or may not have had the same stories, which we can get into, to get you to join. It doesn't look like that may happen over the next 2 years.
No, I agree. And I think there is probably that common theme, and there is that gap is getting bigger. And that's why I believe it's important for us to tell our stories. If we don't, A, nobody's going to know, or B, somebody else will tell it. So I think to educate people and inform them of what's going on, we actually do have to share and get up and talk about our experiences.
But I think that's where you do very well, right? I think The Transition Mission is a great book. I think it's important because you did so many interviews, right, to get to that book, right? Thousands, I think it was. I forgot what the total number was, but it was like several thousand.
Yeah, 2,000 informational interviews.
So
on my journey.
Yeah, so you talk about you have a significant baseline of data, and I think that's important, because I think that's going to be one of our strongest things, is that people, good or bad experiences, if someone's willing to listen to them, especially like you said, being a great ambassador for the Army and for the military, for that matter. I think it's important because it's a good recruiting tool, because I always think of service. I want, I always say this, right? Last census was 1 million veterans, I think it was, in the United States. And I think I might be wrong, but I think it's close to this. It's like 85% of them are E6 and below. I always say wars are fought and won on the backs of, that entire enlisted population. Now, we have outliers, don't get me wrong. We know that there's probably some great, outstanding company grade officers and E87s and above that did wonderful, incredible things during the war. But the numbers, the quantity, we know is different. I think it's important that we talk to those soldiers or those members of the military in that demographic, which is good, because I think there's so many of them. If they have those good experiences, and they're going to have bad, right? I've heard every TAP story. My TAP story is, actually wasn't even TAP, it's ACAP, was atrocious. But I would love, because I want to hear your point of view of what do you think about that? You've lived it. You've talked to 2,000 people. That, I think, really makes a difference, because you listen to their story. And I think it's going to help them if they have a good feeling that somebody actually cared enough to listen. And it's not I'm not talking about kumbaya stuff, but a senior NCO came in and said he'd listened to what I said. And not only did he listen, but he adapted it to something I can learn from and people can get to. I hope that can make a difference for somebody in that transition game.
Yeah, I think, just on my journey, it was crucial. I wouldn't be where I was without it. But I think it has side effects, second, third order effects both ways. I was sharing my kind of service story, if you will, to the people I spoke with, some veterans, some non-veterans, and that was a way of spreading that. And then they also shared with me either their veteran experience or their, industry experience, or both. So it worked both ways. I think everybody comes out of most of them situations better off for it. Maybe not something that's tangible, but there's a lot of good that happens there. And I think the more people can do that and talk about it, and it doesn't even just have to be on like shows like this. It can be just, hey, at work around the water cooler at break,
Right.
or with your neighbor or somebody at church, wherever, the soccer game, for your kids, and they happen to see you're a veteran and you talk a little bit about your story. It breaks down those barriers. And I didn't really notice, because a lot of times in the military, it's not prison, but we're inside some walls and we
Right.
kind of live a different life. And then, on my journey, I started realizing it. And then I really realized it now, how big of a gap there is of how people don't understand, where just like a funny one is a lot of times people are like, oh, you guys live in tents like on MASH. And I'm like, well, maybe deployed, but like not back home for the most part. So just then, if there's that little bit of understanding, what are the other, misunderstandings there? And I've seen it, especially in my program for my graduate degree. Most of those people have not been around veterans. So it's a game changer when, especially somebody like me, and I say this a lot, like if you hear a guy's a drill sergeant and a Green Beret, you're probably thinking, wow, this guy's an a-hole. Like he's just going to be, a mean cuss. And like people see me and they're like, oh, wow, you broke down a stereotype, because I didn't think of it like this. And then like, oh, wow, you actually have a brain and you think through problems. You don't just shoot people. I'm like, yeah, shooting people is kind of the last resort in a lot of senses. So
Yeah, I mean, it's the Hollywood effect, right? Because when they hear, first off, they hear Green Beret, just pick a movie, right? I mean, they're going to be like automatically going to that stereotype. But then the same thing, you pick a drill sergeant or a drill instructor, all of a sudden, they go back to flashbacks of Full Metal Jacket and Gunnery Sergeant Hartman. And they're thinking, holy cow, he's coming in here and, the knife hands and choking Gomer Pyle. And, that's just the first day and the first 5 minutes of reception. Right. So, I can appreciate that. And I think that's important too. Like you said, is that I think when you come to, especially what you do, right. Like this is a perfect example of where I think veterans shine, right? COVID-19, we're here. Now let's talk about just in general. Now, if you talk about individuals that are deployed, that go to isolated areas for extended periods of time, and the only time they're actually doing anything is because they're going outside the wire, and it's going to be a shit show, and then they're going to come back, and it's going to be, it's their only job that day is is movement to contact, right? And then they come back in. I think that's important nowadays because we're in a very unique situation where there's so much unknown, right? I mean, we're all sitting home, most of us at least, and we just don't know what is going to be next. But I tell me, and I think about this too, because I had a conversation with somebody yesterday I was interviewing, and I remember back, and I don't know if you had the same experience, but like I remember during the invasion in 03, back in 03, that's how old we all are, right? So back in 03 during the invasion, I remember sitting on the side of Tampa and, it was a couple days into the war, maybe a week or two. We had just got past the Nasiriyah. And I remember talking to a soldier and I said, hey, what's the day? And he's like, do you mean the date, sir? I'm like, no, the day of the week. Like, what is the day of the week? And it was just like a random thing. Like, you just catch your breath for a second. It's been a crazy couple of days. And he's like, and this was the telling part was he's like, I don't know. Hold on, let's go. And like this is the funny thing, because, prior to phones and everything else, we can just look at the thing. It's automatic. I had to go find my XO. And I go, hey, do you have like anything that was date and time of the week? And like, there's nobody watches. It was like really simple stuff. And we had to open up the Blue Force. I think it was the Blue Force tracker. And like on the bottom, it said the thing. And I'm like, oh, okay, it's Thursday. I mean, nobody knew what it was, right? I'm like, but like now I feel the same thing that's happening, which I don't think is a bad thing because it kind of talks to you about time, and like how it's just how you manage it a certain way. But I find myself often now, even this week, I was like, what is today? Like this could be Saturday. I wouldn't know the difference. But in that mindset, though, veterans thrive, right? And I think that's something that, again, unique crisis, COVID-19 doesn't when have we seen this in anybody's lifetime, right? Except for the pandemic back in whatever in the late the early 1900s. But what I'm saying is, I think people need to look to veterans at this time because I think we're unique when it comes to how it affects them in leadership, right? I think, and if you and let me know your thoughts on it, but I think personally, I love seeing how, like on LinkedIn and some other things, I love seeing how they're thriving, because to them, this is just like, okay, we're prepared. Army or Marines, whatever, prepared us more than anything else to hurry up and wait and sit in a place for 20, for I don't know how many days until nothing happens, with zero contact with everybody. But I think from organizations, and let me know that they should be recognizing that this is a great time to show the leadership of veterans inside organizations and how, especially civilian organizations, because this is what they've been prepared for through their training.
So I agree. I don't know how many times, even stateside during training, I forget what day it is, or can't figure out what day it is, especially overseas, unless it was the holy day or something, and it may change the schedule. And I think it's because it doesn't matter what day it was. You're doing tasks.
Right.
You're accomplishing tasks. And I think that's what we can bring back to here is, it doesn't matter that today's Monday, which I think it is Monday, but it's task-based. What task do I have to get done? What is our mission? And I know those are usually, military type terms, but it helps simplifies life. What is my task? What am I accomplishing today? I get them done, and then I move on to the next task. I get that done. I move on to the next one, or I move on to the next mission. And I think framing it in that mindset helps. And for me, not to be self-serving, but I feel like I'm a master of chaos, where other people get freaked out. That's where I get more calm. So, an example could be in a firefight, surrounded, getting shot at from all sides. That's the coolest, calmest collective you'll ever see me. To bring that into industry and sit here, and this is, I'm just one of millions of veterans who can come in and, all right, what is important? Nobody's shooting at us right now. Everybody take a deep breath. Fortunately, nobody's dying right outside. What is important? What's the task at hand? And let's accomplish it, and let's move on. Let's not worry about all the stuff that doesn't really matter, that just gets in the way. Self-imposed hurdles, stress. There's stress, but a lot of it is self-imposed.
Right.
I'm worried what's going to happen here. Just accomplish the task. Stop worrying. I think that's where veterans can bring. We have so much experience dealing with it, and I think a lot of civilians that never been around veterans may not know that, but the amount of just the average veteran who's deployed once or twice, doesn't even have to be into anything crazy. The amount of just absurdity that they go through,
right,
and whether it's sitting around to wait or chaos, and what most people would be like, oh my God, this is the hardest event in my life. And it's well, this is just another day.
Right.
Okay, let's Groundhog Day. We'll do it again tomorrow. And that builds character and strength that can be used, in current times.
So let's switch gears, and everything you say, again, I think we're on the same page. I think this is a great time for companies, or even prospective companies, to realize that, look forward and be strategic, because hiring veterans makes a difference. And I think that it's a natural born ability to adapt to these types of situations, and it's somewhat seamless, because it's interesting to me. And again, I'm not saying we're the best in class at all, but I will say that my conversations with individuals over the last several weeks, all that have served and all been, they even downrange for that matter, they all, and just like you said, they all had the same really great positive outlook in the fact, and some have right now some difficulties, right? Especially, I know someone who lost their job. And we're scrambling to help him right now, and I'm not worried about it. He'll land absolutely on his feet. He's a stud. But the one thing that I got out of all of this was, they find the silver lining, and they all say, this is, it's going to suck, but you know what? Like you just said, I get to hang out with my kids. I get to do this. I get to do that. And I think that's what we allow it, because like you said, in social isolation, when I'm looking at the same guy for so long and I already want to strangle him, because I'm like, oh my God, I couldn't take you when we were back in Garrison. I'm like, all right, now I'm going to have to deal with whatever idiosyncrasies that you have for the next, I don't know how many times, months. And I'll bite down and I'll do it. And, I think it's an important, again, an important lesson. But what I do want to switch gears is before we start, because I do want to talk a little bit about the transition mission. Because again, I think it's an important book that I think soldiers, and I got to stop saying that, military members could benefit from it, because we all do, but I'm always going to have that affinity. Take me through your transition, because I mean, you had to, in order to, I always felt this way, in order you to write a book and to take the time to get over 2,000 informational interviews, there's a reason for that passion. So, and I assume, like you said earlier, that it was because of your transition, because if you had a great transition, you're not looking back, right? I mean, things are good. So tell me a little bit about where that came from, because that seems like there's so much passion there to go through the lengths and to get that detail and organize it in such a great manner so that it's easy. And it's like you said, it's not just a 1, 2, 3 book, like a checklist. It gives you through these interesting scenarios of everybody where you have those so many hours of research that really paints an interesting picture.
Yeah, it started about 2 years out from my retirement, and I didn't know what I was going to do. Actually, was not still focused on that. I was still operational, still deploying, running a special forces team. And I sat down with a Vietnam era Green Beret 2 nights in a row for like 3 hours each night. And that really got me thinking, and he went on to graduate from Wharton, very hugely successful businessman on Wall Street in his own companies. And I was like, wow, I don't know what I want to do. I've never thought of anything else. I only want, right. I had, my military goals, and this train's going to end at some point, and I need to get on, figure out what I'm going to do the rest of my life. So that's really where it started. And then it was like, I had to discover myself and what is important to me, what was real my identity and who I am. And as I started doing that, I was like, well, where am I going? Where am I going to get to? Hopefully I live a lot more years out of uniform than in uniform.
Right.
So if I'm fortunate enough to do that, okay, what am I going to be doing? So I have purpose, so I'm happy. And in my terms, successful, and you'll hear me say that a lot, like, it's not what's successful to someone else, it's for me. What is successful in my eyes? And that's going to be different for everyone. And then I realized I didn't know what I didn't know, and I knew I didn't know a lot. So how was I going to figure this out? And right. I had military training, and I had military, decision-making process, planning unconventional warfare. So I was like, well, let's treat this like a mission going to X country, just the country's the United States. And I began studying the problem set. I began looking into it, and through talking with people. So along the way, really what started the book was, I had I failed. Like, I messed up totally, did not have a PACE plan, primary alternate contingency emergency. I had one plan, and that didn't work. And I was didn't waste because I learned so much through a year, but I was like, wow, I'm an idiot. People told me, hey, think of other things. And I didn't. I was laser focused. In some ways that helped, but I did not do what I was trained to do. So that was one mistake. And then, of course, just like everyone, I got turned down for jobs, turned down for things. And it's, that could be a kick in the teeth when you're like, oh, I'm good. And wow, right. I don't get hired. This is normal. This is what normal people deal with. And we're not used to coming out of the military. So I said, once I got to a point where I was successful in my own eyes, let me give back. And it was for all those reasons. The people that helped me out, the failures I had, I wanted other people to learn from. And hopefully somebody else could pick it up. And it's just that much easier for them on their journey.
So tell us a little bit about the transition mission. I mean, we talked about how we got there and where it is. Tell me about, if you want to take, I know there's a lot of lessons from that book. I'm not going to say that you could grab one thing. If you want to do kind of a summary of it, what are some of the let's put it this way. Let's do the 3 up, 3 down. What are some of the failures you see most people doing as far as good advice that soldiers or military members should know? What are the 3 probably big failures you see that affect them with their transition?
I'd say one is transition is more than just finding a job. That's part of it, but you're leaving a tribe behind, you're leaving a team behind, a whole sense of identity. And you're going into a kind of a different land that speaks a different type of English. with a little bit different stuff. So there's more to it than just a job. Most people just think about a job. I need X dollars. Next would be dollars, are different depending on if you're living in Charlotte or DC or LA or New York City or, Boise, Idaho. So what is it that you actually need to survive? But more importantly, what's going to be your purpose?
Right.
What's going to make you happy? So those two things, and then own the journey. I think most people rely at some point, and I was doing it too, was relying on others. Like, oh, what can this service do for me? Instead of, I need to take ownership of my journey and not leave it up to others. And I know you said 3x4. Yeah. I always say is, thank you for your service means thank you for your service, not thank you for your service and I'm hiring you for this job.
Right.
And I think that's kind of a misconception through different times some of us have, and we find out real fast that's not true.
So what about, so those are, I think they're excellent points. What about things that you've seen? What do you see what would you sustain? 3 things that you see that's a common factor. That's the other thing I'm interested in, because I'd like to see what's best practices out there, obviously, and you have a lot. Top of your head, what are probably the best practices you encourage people to continue to do, or at least to look into?
Stay positive, number one. Okay. You're going to get kicked, just like anything in life. Truly, probably all this will go through anything in life, but you're going to get kicked figuratively in the teeth a lot and get turned down for things, not understand stuff, feel lost, but stay positive. And it's easy to stay positive when everything's going well. It's staying positive when it's not going well and you didn't get that job you really wanted.
Right.
How do you stay positive then? Then it's about being humble and realizing I did what I did in the service. Now I have to earn my next, whatever comes next. I have to earn this. And being humble enough to know that and to seek out information. And that'd be the last one, is seek out information. It's not an individual sport. It's a team sport.
Right.
Yes, you're owning it, but it's a team sport of get help from others. So many people want to help. If you reach out to them and let them know you need help, or even it's just a little bit of a talk. So those would be my 3 rules to get to where you're going.
So let me ask you this then. So again, unique time right now, because this conversation took place yesterday on a Sunday of all things, because I had a panicked person in the military because they're getting ready to retire. Now they don't have to get out because they only have, I think they're just about to hit, he said it was his 21st year. So I get it. Now that's a retirement. He could stay in. It's fine. What do you have? I mean, to take a step back now, would you take any difference with the whole situation? Because it is just an unknown right now, right? Because you have a job in the military. Are there any extra steps or advice you'd give, considering COVID-19 is happening right now, that you'd say maybe step back or look strategically? I don't know what that would be. What would that look like?
I feel everybody's got to do their own, whatever's best for them individually. For me, I knew when it was time to hang up for the uniform, it was time to hang it up. And if a crisis had happened, say 18 months ago, I would not have turned around, because I had mentally shifted of it's time to be done.
Okay.
So I'm not going to do this just for a paycheck. But again, that's me. Anybody else could be different. This is some difficult times. I do think, some honest self-assessments of, like myself, I took some months off when I retired and kind of connected with my family and kind of connected with myself, if that's even possible. For the first time, I had nothing to do. And I was like, wow, this is weird. But then it really gave me some time to reflect. Probably for the first time, really built a solid bond with my kids because I was with them all the time. So I didn't need to go to work right away. I think a lot of people are like, oh, I got to have a job the next day. Well, fortunately, I'd set myself up and I knew through retirement pay and everything that I could probably go, X amount of months before I needed a job. So doing that self-assessment and thinking of, what's best for them is what I recommend. But no doubt it's difficult now. If you're 6 months out or more, this is a great time to prep the environment for when you do get out. But if you're like retiring time, next 60 days or 90 days, yeah, that's a tough call right there.
Yeah, no. So I will tell you, I said, listen, I go, you're the only one that pays your bills. And I go, what is a year, or two? You got your high 3. I go, what is a year or two to ensure that you always have food on the table? Because I said, the last thing I wanted you to see was, yeah, you're going to get that retirement, but let me tell you what you lose. And you said it earlier, which was a good point, which I think people forget a lot in transition. You lose BAH, you lose BAS, which was tax-free, by the way. And then you're going to get half your paycheck. Then it's probably most likely already taxed. I go, so all of a sudden you're at a deficit where you didn't think about prior. And then, like you said, even more important, I think is a good point is demographically speaking, where are you going to move to? Now, if you move home to Butte, Montana, and you were stationed at the Pentagon, you know what? You might be able to be like, shit, I'm going to hang out for 7 months because I've covered myself, live well, family's good. I'm solid on E78 pay, and things are good for a while. But I did say, I go, I don't know. I said, I always had I had the double whammy, like they say during my transition, because it definitely was a double whammy. You want to talk about an interesting time. So I was medically retired. I got hurt when I was in Iraq on my third tour, and I had the double whammy of Walter Reed had happened, the scandal, and I remember I was in Landstuhl when I got medevaced, and I had just gotten surgery, and they really got into the day room, and that's for me. Back then it was the greatest thing in the world. I hadn't watched TV in I don't know how long. And I remember two reasons that I remember. First off, they came in and on the TV, I think it was Fox News or that the channel was on. And the first thing I noticed, they had the whole expose on the VA, on the Walter Reed Hospital. And I'm like, I wonder how that's going to affect me. And I'm like, I'm never going, because we already got laid back for a while. Like we were supposed to go, and they were just like, everyone's staying put for a while. And I'm like, okay. And then the second thing that was interesting, well, I never forget it was the day the Virginia Tech shootings happened. And I remember like, oh my God. So there's certain days that remind me of the situation. So the interesting part, not that the Virginia Tech thing wasn't horrible, but for my transition, I was like, shit, now what happens? Because I'm stuck. Like I thought I didn't understand what was happening. And I actually had every intention of getting back into the, I was a career guy myself. I was like, you know what? I'm not going anywhere. I love the Army, still love to this day. We all bitch and moan about different things. I love being, I felt myself fortunate enough to have been lower enlisted NCO and an officer. And I love that, right? I still look back at my favorite time in the world living in the barracks. People look at me like, I'm like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Dude, there was nothing better. From E4 and below, I had the best time. But I had the double whammy. So I had this very unique time where I wasn't allowed back to, there was no Walter Reed. And I was like, okay, so I don't know what to do. So they sent us to the Four Corners, essentially, right? I wound up at Eisenhower Medical Center at Fort Gordon in Augusta, Georgia. Wow. And I was like, what? Let me tell you how interesting, this is how crazy it was. And I'm not knocking the Army. And I'm actually mad at them because you know what? No matter what, we make shit happen. And I think the interesting part was, this is one thing. So we're all on stretchers. They landed us in Andrews when we got from Landstuhl. We spent 24 hours in Andrews. I'm like, hey, I guess we're going to Bethesda or, Walter Reed. They're like, nope. They go, you're going here, because they wouldn't let anybody in there. So I had guys went to Carson, Lewis. I mean, they went everywhere. And so I'm like, okay. So I think there was 4, I don't remember the number, 4 or 5 of us. It was a handful of folks. And they're like, you're going down to Eisenhower Medical Center. I'm like, great. And like, we're on stretchers, and they bring us up and they literally put us in a C-130 and cargo nets. And I'm like, first off, and I was in 03 at the time. And I'm like, all right. And I'm like, listen, guys, I go, first off, they kept bumping my leg, which really bothered me because it hurt. And I was like, we're in cargo nets. Like, just at least, duct tape me to the floor at least. You know what I mean? Like a little bit more. Nope, sir, you'll be fine. It's only a 2-hour flight. And I'm like, yeah, right, dude, whatever. But here was the crazier part about this. So when we land, comes off, I'll never forget this conversation because it was one of those where he felt really bad. A chaplain comes on board and he comes, the ramp goes down, he comes up and he's like, and he singles me out because I must have been the only officer in the group. And he goes, hey, listen. He goes, all right, you can't be mad. I go, well, I'm not mad. I'm like, I'm just trying to figure out what's going on. And I think they actually gave me a fentanyl lollipop at the time. So I'm like, all right, this is really great. I didn't care, which is not, listen, not to abuse the kids, but let me tell you, there's a thing way before this epidemic called a fentanyl lollipop that medics in Corman would use. And let me tell you something, you don't feel anything. So, except you'll probably get sick, which I did eventually. But anyway, so he says, well, we're gonna put you on a school bus, and that's how we're gonna get you to the hospital. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? I go, we're all on stretchers and wheelchairs. He goes, yeah, you're gonna be in between the seats. And I'm like, yeah, okay. And like, literally, there was like guys doing litter carries, and they would take us and they stuck us in between the seats, like on these stretchers. And I'm like, well, the Army got it done. So that was an interesting part because my transition, and you would appreciate this if you want an interesting story. You sit down there for a while. I got another surgery, which is fine. And that didn't impact the whole thing. But I remember sitting in the hospital and someone just walks in. It was an MEB, a PEBLO, Physical Evaluation Board Liaison Officer. And they're like, well, we're going to convene an MEB. You're done. And I'm like, okay. And to me, I'm like, oh, I'm doing my 20 years because I was only at year, I think 9.5 at the time. And I'm like, I don't know what that meant. I actually had no idea. I'm like, oh, okay, that's great. Yay. Like, I'm like, oh, maybe it means I'm getting more physical therapy, right? Or who knows? I really had no idea. And so they kind of explained it to me. They're like, you're going to be retired. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? So that was interesting. But here was the most interesting thing about it. And I think for why it was almost, it turned into a double whammy was after that point, I was home within 3 weeks. No ACAT, except for I showed up. They made me clear, which I still don't understand because my unit was still in theater. I had no gear. This was my favorite thing. So you would, I don't know if you'd actually appreciate this more than anybody. So they made me go to CIF. I'm like, dude, you realize they cut everything off of me before I hit Balad, right? I go, I have nothing, right? I'm like, no weapon. I had my dog tags and I had my, thank God it was actually interesting because, you used to wear your wallet around your neck, that little with the breakaway.
Yeah, the lanyard.
Yeah, the lanyard. Yeah. So I had that. So for me, that was good. So I had two things on me, but I was naked essentially when I got to launch school. And because they wound up doing surgery on me in theater. Like just very quick. I don't remember. I do remember, I don't know how long it took, but I do remember getting the epidural. And I was just like, they're like, you're going to feel real good in about 2 seconds. And then they gave me the, whatever, like a Xanax or something. And then I was out. But the interesting thing was it was literally 3 weeks. And in that 3 weeks, there was no transition whatsoever, except for they made me try to clear CIF, which was my favorite story because the civilian was sitting there looking at me. He goes, okay, where's your stuff? And I'm like, dude, listen, I'm going to explain it to you. And like, he couldn't get his head around it because he's like, well, why are you here? I'm like, I don't know either. I go, but I have to, like, they're not letting me clear unless you sign this. They had to get a supervisor. I'm like, I go, you couldn't statement of charge of me anyway, because I don't even know what the hell, it's in a box somewhere. So it's gone. And then I thought that was crazy. So finally I got through all that. And, and I think that's also a bigger problem is that at that point I was frustrated because of the lack of information and how fast it was and how I didn't get any resources. And I just wanted to go home. Right. I mean, I had already been, and in some cases, not everyone, and I'm not saying this is the same, but I'd been in the hospital since February. It's now July, essentially. So by the time I got to that, and then I had a little bit of time because when they walked in my office, it was late June, not office, my hospital room was late June. And then I was home July 20th, I was home. And I was like, wow, okay, now it's real, no job. It's, it actually took 4 months for my retirement to even kick in. And I had to go through that whole process, but whatever. So you have the double whammy. So now it's July 2007 when we're just about to burst the entire bubble of the economy, right? So I'm like, oh, I'm just going to go get a job as a defense contractor because everyone says it's so easy and I have a clearance and it's great. And then all of a sudden it was within days of when everything exploded, right? And then by the time I took everything really in, Lehman Brothers in January collapses. So the market's now gone. And I'm like, wow, okay. So it was a very unique time, and I sympathize with a lot of people because even under those circumstances, I'm like, in the end, it forced me to start a business because I was just like, I needed to do it, which thank God, I look back and this is the reason it happened. But I think for you, because you listen to so many people, and I kind of went off a tangent. I think I love your takeaways and I like what you do about keeping positive about the whole time. Because I will tell you, I didn't most of the time because I was like, you got to be. I mean, my unfortunate reaction after a certain point of time was like, you got to be kidding. Because normally I'm like, it's all right. But then I almost felt like I was abandoned. But I think for people, for me, that I want to talk to and tell people stories, that it got me angry enough where I'm like, I'm not letting them win. Like, and then, but for me, I realized that it's, the Army had to deal with a situation that was unprecedented. We're in the surge. There was no warrior transition units at the time. People like Walter Reed had just happened. Like everything that was stacked up against you, but I've never gotten mad at them. You know what I mean? So I think the one thing I love about your story is you're very positive about things, and you took the time to curate a very great narrative about that. And it shows. But I think that becomes from the fact where when I look at, your bio and resume, and I know he's not going to say it, but I believe he was the only drill sergeant of the year and Green Beret. Were you Green Beret of the year? And then I forgot.
I'm the only person to have won the drill sergeant of the year for the Army and earned the Green Beret.
So if we talk about someone that, like I said, and he wants to say it, I'm going to say I'll put him as a legend because I've met all drill sergeants that I've met, SF, depending on what level of operator, and I haven't met both either. So, but I've met very specific times. So I thought that was a very interesting characteristic. And you're right. Meeting you, Herb, has been a pleasure because I don't see, and I'm not knocking them. I got, I have drill sergeants who are just out, still keep that, that mentality and not laid back at all. They still get that voice and they still get it going, which I think is great because it's nostalgic for me. But I guess the other thing is going through, before we kind of start finishing up, going through your experience. What do you have today for, what would be, I guess, in finding the book, they can read the book. What would be, if you could change one thing about the current system? I actually like Soldier for Life. I think the resources are good. But like for TAP, I think, and this is a pretty loaded question, but I've actually sat in recently on a TAP class. I was curious. A friend of mine had it. They held it at for some reason, a VBOC. But whatever, that's the reason they did it. I think it was a spacing issue or something, but whatever. And that's who invited me. I watched the TAP class, and it was interesting because the Air Force actually was a part of that TAP class. But it was mostly Army. And I asked why there was an Air Force person, because they were dressed in their uniform. And they said they didn't offer it on their base, but they were required to take it. And I said, okay, well, that's interesting. So the one thing I took away from it was the same thing it always is, and especially from being a listed guy and then being an NCO, and I think you absolutely can do it. The minute someone tells me something mandatory and I got to sit there, I fucking tune out. I don't care, especially nowadays. If I can just touch my phone and look at it, I'm not paying attention. So like if someone said, all right, Herb, I'm giving you executive authority today. I want you to change one thing, two things, or three things that would make a difference inside that TAP program. What would you do?
Yes, king for a day.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's much improved, and from what you had when you got out to what I had, and then to what they got going on now, it's improving. I think one is, how do you get people to understand how serious this is going to be?
Yes.
And I think most of us all underestimate it until like your reality hits you in the face and you found yourself at home and going, wow. Or, when I found my reality, and I think everybody hits them at times. So how do you do that? I would actually make TAP not just, hey, you got to do this in your last 6 months. It should be a part of, and I know every course in the military, they're trying to jam 10 pounds of crap into a 2-pound sack. Right. But if at least it was talked about there, and hey, here's some things, it would become a normal thing to talk about. It wouldn't be just, oh, you're getting out, you're in your last 6 months or your last year, let's talk about it. But even if it's a 1-hour presentation, but agree, it's all how that presentation is given. Because like you said, if it's mandatory, yeah, I'm tuned out, and most people would be, because I don't see it. But if you can get people to understand it is, I'd also think through the TAP program, at some point, over the last years, you had to include, at least in the Army, on evaluation reports like, hey, how did they deal with equal opportunity issues or sexual harassment issues? Well, if you added transition into that, now leaders are going to be, because leaders don't get it because they're not going through the transition yet until they're in it. So I think that would encourage more people to embrace the transition and help people go through it, because it is, hey, I'm losing this soldier. They're leaving our team, our unit to go. Now I got to give them up time. I understand that. But if people understood that better, it would be better. And I think, and this is the hardest part, how you try to scale something, especially with TAP, because what works best for Scott is not what works best for Herb, and your life goals are not my life goals. So right now it meets the bare minimum. So it's check the block. Do you got a job, or you're on your way to a job, but it may not be the right job. So having that scalability, and they're working on that with some entrepreneur programs and some different tracks now, at least with SFL TAP program, but doing that even more, that it's going to look different. It's kind of, but it goes back to you said earlier about CIF. They have a process and they only understand that process. And if you come in crazy outside of that process, it doesn't compute. Yeah. SFL TAP is, now, you could go one or couple ways now with it, but if you're outside of that process, it doesn't help. Like, what if you're going to grad school? What if you're wanting to start business? What if you're just going to go work, run the family farm, whatever it is? Everybody's different. So being able to scale that, what are those common denominators though, that you must do, and getting people to go through that. And then lastly, I would add, again, most of the transition programs only focus on getting a job, nothing about all the other stuff discussed about, the mental component, which in a lot of ways, finding that purpose, leaving the team and tribe behind is a lot bigger than getting a job, or at least equally important, if not more.
And those are all great nuggets of information. The one thing I will say, and before we wrap up, is I had this the other day from somebody, and I thought it was, and I'm never one to really say, oh, things are too harsh, but I also think that I'm getting to learn from really smart people in this situation, because this is more of a passion of mine. Like with what we do from the nonprofit side, I mean, my boring day job is legal remediation, for government contractors, which, most people would be like, oh my God, now I know how to fall asleep at night, just listen to Scott talk about that for 5 minutes. But one of the things I thought was harsh in a conversation I had with somebody the other day on one of these interviews was, he said the soldier needs to take more responsibility. And what I said back to him was, and I thought about it for a second, and I said, well, that's great, except for one thing. I go, I take an E4 who for 4 years, I beat down this E4, him or her. And I said, you know what? You're going to listen to orders. The sergeant, your platoon sergeant, your squad leader is going to tell you what to do. And you're going to listen to it. But now, after they've been indoctrinated and institutionalized for 4 years, you're going to say, you know what? You better take it on your own and start doing your own stuff, right? And getting yourself ready. I don't think that's a fair thing to say, because if you're beating somebody down for 4 years, and I'm not saying that in a bad way, but basically indoctrinating that, hey, this is what you're supposed to do. You listen to your first line leader, you listen to rank, you follow the structure, and that's how you become successful. But then in a switch of, like this, you're going to be like, you know what? Why aren't you stepping up to the plate? Well, gee, Sergeant, up until now, I've literally been, you've held my hand and said, go do this, go clean the motor pool, go make sure your weapons are clean. Yeah, we're going out to the range, make sure you're shooting this or that a day. So I think as much as I want to say that that's great, it's hard for people to recognize the fact that, we're institutionalizing individuals for a long time, and there's nothing wrong with that because the military and it's necessary, but you can't just pull a Band-Aid off and say, hey, how come you're not trying hard enough? I'm like, well, we're not trying hard enough because you're talking about a period of time, a small period of time, if you think it's relative to how many years they enlist, especially somebody who like yourself did it for, 20 plus years, or, as long as they went through their full retirement cycle or did it. And then you're going to be like, you know what? Why don't you stand up for yourself, Sergeant? Let's go. This is your time to shine. And I'm like, yeah, well, that's great. Who's giving me direction instead of it all falls on me? So it's something I thought was interesting. And I actually, it stood with me afterwards because, and again, I'm not sure I'm going to air it because it's somebody who's currently active duty, is pretty prominent. And I didn't think it shed good light because I would never want to do that to somebody because they were speaking their opinion, but it was in an open conversation. But the reality is that it struck me because this is a leader, and this is someone who's an active duty leader who doesn't get it. So I think that to me is a little bit scary. I think from the civilian counterpart, and you said it best earlier, where you say that that the leaders are so removed from the transition process that it's easy for them to say, like, you know what, soldier, suck it up and do it, get it done. It doesn't work that way. What do you kind of think there?
Yeah, I agree. It doesn't. And again, they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
So it's my company commander coming to talk to me about life on Mars. Well, he's never been to Mars. He doesn't know about life on Mars, but he's trying to tell me to suck it up and just do it. So yeah, it is. That's why I believe in enabling people.
Yeah.
Enabling the veterans, the transitioning service members to do what they need to do. And part of that is they do need a little direction, a little bit of, hey, here's some ways to go. Here's some ideas. Here's the art of the possible.
Right.
But, just to say, hey, kick you out the door, goodbye. I mean, how much money and time is invested training every service member to do their job, whatever that is. It ranges from thousands to millions of dollars of time and money invested into training them to be a soldier or an airman or whatever it is, to flip a switch and, all right, go back to being, John or Jane civilian. That it just doesn't, it's not that easy.
Well, listen, everybody, Herb, I appreciate your time today. This was very informative. I liked some of your tips were great. Everybody, Transition Mission, get it. Follow Herb on LinkedIn because he is, there's few people I read every day posts because I like to learn so I can educate others and point them to smart people on these topics. Follow Herb, get the book, follow whatever he is. Do you have anything else you want to push right now, Herb?
No, that's it. Just keep doing good things, positive things. We all help each other, so we'll get there.
Okay, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, the great Herb Thompson.
Hey, thanks, Scott. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.